Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Today we are looking at and taking a deep dive into The Menu. Just a heads up that this episode will contain spoilers, so just bear that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. Also bear in mind that this episode will include some subject matter that some may find distressing, not in detail, only mentioned in passing, but I'll put in the description box what it is it's referencing. The Menu opens with Tyler Ledford and Margot Mills, who, joined by Lillian Bloom, a food critic, her editor Ted, a wealthy couple, the Liebrants, a has-been movie star and his PA, and business partners Soren, Dave and Bryce. The group have all paid extortionately for the privilege of a night of fine dining at Hawthorne, a restaurant on a private island run by celebrity chef Julian Slowik. The guests enjoy the increasingly bizarre and avant-garde courses served to them. The only one not buying into the fine dining experience is Margot, who calls out the meals as an insult. Pretty soon, though, things take a turn for the strange, with tortillas containing sensitive photos revealing guests' secrets, and then just outright deadly, sending the guests into a panic. They become distressed as they begin to fear for their safety. All that is except for Tyler, who is still enjoying the mouthfeel. And worry they should, as it turns out that this is not just any fine dining evening at the Hawthorne. No, this is Chef Slowik's final serving and greatest dish. The guests all learn that they have been painstakingly chosen for the evening's event and will in fact be dead by the end of the evening. The Menu was written by Will Tracy and Seth Reese. The original story concept came from Will Tracy after he was inspired by a dining experience that he had had at an island restaurant outside of Bergen in Norway during his own honeymoon. Apparently, in order to help create an authentic fine cuisine dining experience for the audience, several people from the world of fine dining were brought onto the project as consultants, including Dominique Crenn, a French food designer who is currently the only female chef in America to hold 3 Michelin stars. Good for her. Some of the dishes in the film are genuine recreations of some of the dishes found in her own restaurant, Atelier Crème. The Menu was directed by British TV and film director Mark Mylod, who had previously directed 3 other films and episodes on various TV shows, such as the British The Royal Family, Cold Feet, The Fast Show and Shameless, and American TV shows such as Game of Thrones, Once Upon a Time and Entourage. The Menu has an absolutely stellar cast, in my opinion, but you know, it's also just straight facts. You've got people such as Janet McTeer as Lillian Bloom and John Leguizamo as, quote, a movie star. And in the 3 lead roles you have Ralph Fiennes as Chef Slowik, Nicholas Hoult as Tyler, and the ever-radiant and talented Anya Taylor-Joy as Margot. And the cast and screenplay really make this movie. I mean, I guess they make most movies, right? But you know what I mean. The Menu is for the most part a one-location film, and often that's hard to keep some members of the audience engaged. Look, I'm not judging. It's hard these days when everything is 2 minutes in length and has flashing lights and constant action and jump cuts. Of course it's hard for some to stay engaged. But The Menu, in my opinion, achieves this through a strong screenplay, which I must say is even stronger on a rewatch. Honestly, if you've not rewatched it, I would highly recommend it. There's always so much going on in each shot. There's someone to watch in the background doing something, whether it's the chefs in the kitchen or a guest at another table. And there are throwaway lines that don't register as much on a first watch, but mean so much on a rewatch. For example, when Elsa is giving the guests a tour of the island, they stop at the staff's quarters and one of the business guys asks, "Do you ever get burnt out?" Meaning, from working such long hours. And Elsa's response is,
"Burned out?"
We never burn anything unless by design. The cast are captivating in their roles, especially Anya Taylor-Joy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The woman doesn't do a bad movie. Plus, it's certainly not a bad movie to look at. The visuals are stunning, from the courses themselves, to the colour palette of the restaurant interior shots, to the nature on the island. When the trailer for The Menu came out, I was convinced that it was going to be a film about cannibalism. I mean, come on. A story about pretentious rich people heading off to an isolated restaurant with eerie chefs lurking everywhere. But even though I went into the film thinking I knew what it was going to be about, I was wrong. but not completely off the mark. It's really hot today, so my window's open, so I do apologise if you can hear the birds having their little conversation outside. The menu may not serve up the rich on a plate, but they don't escape punishment. The Menu is a satirical, dark comedy horror / thriller that satires the pretentious world of fine dining and the privileged people who are able to afford a seat at the table. And through this setting and story, the Menu is able to explore themes on classism and elitism and the inequality that's created by money. I mean, in the film's opening scene, when we meet Margot and Tyler, Margot asks Tyler if the boat is big enough to fit everyone, and he explains yes, as there are only 12 customers in total. Margot questions how could they possibly turn a profit with only 12 customers a night. But it turns out quite easily when it costs $1,250 a head. I do love the line from Tyler when he's describing the chef's menu for the evening, and he says, quote, "The game is trying to guess what the overarching theme of the meal is going to be. You won't know until the end." End quote. I mean, sure, he's talking about the literal menu, but it's also as though he's talking to the audience about the film, The Menu. I enjoyed that nice little touch. But the menu does make its overarching themes a little bit more obvious. It splits its characters into givers and takers. In other words, the working class servers and the wealthy who are served. So you have Chef Slowik and his cult-like team of staff, and then the rich guests who have paid through the nose to be there. The menu also looks at the superficiality of the wealthy and the elitism that they create. The 12 guests that attend Hawthorne, except for the stand-in audience member Margot, are all wealthy, entitled people who are far less concerned with the craft of food prep and the actual food itself, and more concerned with the experience that their money has bought them. I mean, the 3 businessmen literally talk about this. In a scene where they're less than impressed with the food, one of them says, quote, "Whatever, at least we can say we've been here, right? My dad used to say that you buy the experience." End quote. Chef Slowik identifies that he has been part of the problem by allowing his work to be priced so high that only an elite group of wealthy people can eat his food, yet they don't care for the food or what goes into making it. Consider the conversation he has with the wealthy older couple. He asks them to name just one dish that they have eaten over the 11 visits that they've had. And they can't. They ask, what does it matter? To which Chef replies, it matters to the halibut, as in the animal who has died for you to eat, and to the artist whose work turns into inside your gut. Most people would be grateful to have had one visit to Hawthorne, and yet this couple have been 11 times and barely paid any attention on any one occasion. There's also the food critic whose self-importance announces to her editor that everything that is happening that evening is, quote, just for them. But the food critic, along with everyone else, is pulled up on her sins. In her case, it is by critiquing the people with actual culinary talent. And in some cases, causing their restaurants to close. I love this quote taken from a High on Films article which says, quote, "The celebrity chef wanted to bring the wealthy guests to their knees so that they realise what it feels like to be helpless and at the mercy of someone else." End quote. Because that's how it can feel for the working class and for people in service. It's also, I imagine, what it can feel like for artists of art in any form, having their work judged and criticised by people who feel they could do a better job and yet never have and never will. What's interesting about the guests is that, like Chef Slowik says, not one of them tried very hard to escape or fight back against what he was doing to them. I mean, sure, he's got them trapped there in the restaurant in order for them to learn a life lesson, but he's not exactly Jigsaw. That's what I'm saying. Perhaps they've been hidden in the safety of their wealth for so long that they've forgotten how to fight anything, because they've never had to. They've always just gotten what they wanted with no opposition. So maybe they just don't know what to do now that someone else has the power over them. I have heard a theory that the menu is actually an allegory for the movie industry and is commenting on the different factions of that world. So Chef becomes the director. The food critic just becomes a film critic. The businessmen are the executives, and Tyler is the superfan who picks the art to pieces, showing off his knowledge. I mean, who would do that? I really like this theory, and it definitely works, but I think you could also apply it to any form of art or media. The character of Tyler Ledford is a perfect example of the elitism that the menu is addressing. While he differs from the other guests in that he is actually interested in the food, in the craft, and in the chef, he is still just as much a part of the problem of elitism. Tyler is arrogant, incredibly condescending, and feels as though he stands apart from and above the others because of how he knows so much more about food than they do. The fact he feels that he stands apart from the others is evidenced in how he acts as though the rules don't apply to him. For example, when he takes photos of the food despite them being told they can't, and how he doesn't run away with the other men because of course it doesn't apply to him. He only does it once Chef Slowik tells him to. His arrogance comes from his belief that he is a true foodie who is the only one who can appreciate what Chef Slowik is creating. When he sees the 3 businessmen arrive, he says, "Great. Power tasting. They'll be wasted by the amuse." He also scoffs at the has-been actor by saying apparently he's a big foodie. Well, thinks he is. How ironic. And he's constantly correcting Margot on her apparent incorrect enjoyment and understanding of the food and the menu. Oh, and don't forget we have the inclusion of mouthfeel.
Mouthfeel.
Ugh. Mouthfeel. Tyler is a perfect example of the divide between the wealthy and the working class. We see it in his attitude towards people in service. While we see Margot address the staff and say hi, he just ignores them. Margot also pulls him up for not asking the sous chef's name, to which his response is, quote, "Yeah, well, you know," with a dismissive hand gesture. We also see him snapping his fingers in Margot's face, calling her a child. He tells her to shush and shut up. And when Margot tells him that he needs to apologise to her and that he can't speak to her in that way, he says, quote, "Actually, I can, because ding dong, I'm actually the one who's paying, so maybe shut up and eat." Taking that to another level is the fact that we discover that Tyler has paid to hire Margot for the evening to join him at the restaurant, and the reason he does this is because they don't seat one guest. But we eventually discover that Tyler actually knew that everyone was going to die that night because he'd been conversing with Slowik for months. So he had hired Margot knowing that she was going to die. That's how little he values her life over his desire to get what he wants. But he is ultimately punished for his behaviour. Chef Slowik invites him into the kitchen after building him up, giving him his own little chef's coat, to humiliate him and publicly expose him as a liar and a fraud. Chef tells him he is why the mystery has been drained from their art. Again, who would do that to someone's creation? Pull it apart and explain the mystery? Beats me. We never find out what Chef whispers to Tyler, but I read in an interview with Nicholas Hoult that Ralph Fiennes actually whispered something different to him on each take because they didn't script what Chef is actually saying. Whatever it was, though, leads Tyler to take his own life. We've seen previously in the movie, though, that Chef Slowik can bring Tyler to tears with what he says, so maybe he said something really profound. Or perhaps he ripped him a new one, and Tyler was just devastated that he had let down his hero. The relationship between Chef Slowik and Margot is an important one, because this ends up being a hitch in Chef's otherwise painstakingly researched plans. His intention is to punish the rich, but we discover Margot is like him, a giver working in service. But I think it's more than just this similarity. It's the fact that Margot challenges him. She isn't fawning over him or the dishes or the restaurant. In fact, she calls a lot of it out as insulting and a joke. I mean, while he may want to punish the elite and the rich, Chef Slowik is well aware that he is the wealthy and part of the problem. He is in a sense punishing himself because he needs the praise and admiration. He even admits it to Margot by saying that because she's not eating, that wounds him. We learn through Margot's discovery of Chef's secret room that Julian Slowik started out as a happy cook who took pride in his food and had a passion for cooking for people's enjoyment. But over the years and with the progression of his career, he has become miserable and trapped in a trap of his own making. This discovery becomes important and leads to Margot being able to save her own life. The photo of Slowik being Employee of the Month at Hamburger Howie's gives her the idea to stand up to Slowik and fight back. She decides to turn Slowik's own words back on himself. He's preached and accused everyone from Tyler to the food critic of taking the fun and mystery out of his art, but now Margot accuses him of taking the fun out of eating. She says he's bored her and failed in his most basic purpose, to feed her. This leads to the big cheeseburger scene where Chef Slowik prepares Margot a simple, well-made cheeseburger. Which is interesting because with all the other courses, it was the other chefs that cooked. This is the only time we see him cook, and we see genuine enjoyment in him doing so. He'd mentioned to Margot earlier in the film that it had been a long time since he had felt any passion to cook for someone. Perhaps this act by Margot spoke to him and reminded him that there are those that take pleasure in their food and what they eat, and that you can cook just for pleasure. It's ultimately why he lets Margot leave, because she is evidently enjoying the food and wants to finish it, but, later and far away from here. So I want to talk about the film's ending for a moment, because the ending leaves you with questions as to Margot's fate. I think on the surface we can assume that Chef Slowik really did feel moved by her request for a simple cheeseburger and let her go. The menu is very clearly sympathetic towards the working class, and so our working class hero Margot must come out the other side, right? However, there are a couple of things that stood out to me on this rewatch that made me reevaluate the ending. First of all, there is the scene where Elsa is giving the guests a tour of the island and they reach the smokehouse. Apparently done in the Nordic tradition with the use of dairy cows only, they, quote, leave the meat to age for 152 days to relax the protein strands. One of the guests asks what happens if the meat is eaten on the 153rd day, to which Elsa replies, the bacteria introduces itself into the consumer's bloodstream and will spread into the spinal membrane, after which point they would become incapacitated and shortly thereafter would expire. So, what if the meat used for the cheeseburger is actually the 153-day-old meat? That would be the end of Margot. Also consider a conversation had by one of the chefs, Catherine, and the female guests. Felicity asks Catherine, are we all really dying tonight? To which Catherine replies, quote, it doesn't work if you live. The menu. It needs an ending that ties everything together conceptually, otherwise it just tastes good and who cares? End quote. Again, like Tyler's comments on the literal menu, this can also be taken as a comment on the film, the menu. Is this alluding to the fact that for the film, everyone needs to die for it to tie together? There is a moment on the boat when Margot pauses as though something is wrong, but then quickly moves past it. I wasn't sure if this was her feeling there was something wrong physically, or just feeling a momentary flash of concern for the people who have just gone up in flames. But I guess the point is, and what we have learnt from the menu, is that we shouldn't break down a piece of art into just its ingredients, deconstructing it so we can say we've eaten it or seen it. But instead, we should taste, savour and relish, both the craft and the creation. Well, that, my dear friends, is the menu. As always, let me know your thoughts down below and let's have a chat about this film. I swear you guys often have some awesome points and comments to make on the movies in these episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give it a little thumbs up. All and any of that jazz really helps with my visibility. I'm not 100% sure what my next episode is going to be, but I do have one idea that I'm really excited about and I'm chomping at the bit to get going with, so maybe I'll go with that one. In fact, I have a couple of episodes coming up this year, in the next few months actually, that I'm really excited about. So if you're new here and you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming ones. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye guys.